Good morning, everyone. I am so happy to be here with you, and I'm so happy that you have energy this morning. I admit I left that party last night wondering a little bit about what I would see here this morning. That was so fun. It was fun for me. How was it for you? Was it good? Good? So let's be honest. When you heard that there was going to be a little talk about failure on the very first night, did anybody just go, what? Kind of feel that a little bit? Did it surprise you how that went? Did it feel different than you kind of thought, those stories? I loved how much fun all of you made those stories. Did everybody feel that? Yeah. And, that's the thing that we really want to begin a conversation about today, is talking about this hard topic in a completely different way. In a way that actually feels kind of fun. So I'm really excited that you seem like such a fun group. Am I right about that? That you're a fun group? I was so surprised last night when I got there, and it felt like it was like a family reunion, like of the healthy kind, where you were actually happy to see each other. And, I have to admit, I was sitting there just smiling. I don't even work for Fusion, although maybe now I want to. But even I loved watching Pete Rupert on tambourine last night. I thought that was awesome. So I would just love to invite you this morning to, right now, just see if you would make just a little bit of a shift in whatever attachment you have to the idea of failure. So if you can just kind of sit back and go, now, what do I think about this failure thing? Does it make me a little anxious to talk about it? How many of you got the survey that I sent you? Thank you, by the way, for doing that. It was fabulous. How many of you struggled just a little bit through answering those questions? I'm seeing some nods. Yeah. So if we can this morning just sort of pay attention to what that struggle is about, and what I want to do is sort of step back from that and just begin a brand new kind of conversation about failure. One that maybe is coming at this thing from a completely different angle. This has actually been happening out there in the world a little bit. I know the font is really small on this. I did my best, but this is a really renowned, learned professor out there in the world who decided that he was going to put his CV of failure out into the world. So I don't know how well you can read this, but the first section here is the degree programs I did not get into. The second section is the academic positions and fellowships I did not get. The third is the awards and scholarships I did not get. So you can see there's a pretty good list, and if you could read it carefully, you'd see that this is kind of big, important stuff. But here's the last part. He calls this meta failures. This darn CV of failures has received way more attention than my entire body of academic work. So I love that this guy just put this out there in the world, and it was his attempt at kind of starting a different kind of conversation about failure. This morning, we were sitting at the table, and I'm going to tell in you a second. What's your name? Kate. So Kate and Jordan and I were talking about last night a little bit, and she said something that just made me so happy. She said, last night felt like it opened the door to conversations that we've never had. Did anybody else feel that? That those stories open the door to talk about things that feel like they're hard to talk about. And that's really what we want to do today. This is a beginning of a conversation, and hopefully a brand new kind of conversation. Oh, did I lose my, it's Tech Day, isn't it? Awesome. Let's give it a hand for Tech Day. I love it when this stuff happens. It's the funnest. Okay, so what we want to do this morning is change the conversation. And here's why I think this is important. I want you to close your eyes a minute. Okay, just close your eyes. And we're going to imagine that dream that Pete unfolded for us this morning, the Fusion Education Group of the future. That is going to be the day where, as an organization, you are truly who you want to be. You are taking the right risks. Okay, imagine this. You are boldly creating new things. You are consistently making great decisions. You are creatively and effectively solving problems. You're communicating effectively with transparency, with candor. You're relating to one another in the best possible ways. You're supporting one another, collaborating courageously in achieving that vision. And you're creating an amazing alchemy of all of your collective genius. Doesn't that feel amazing? Yeah? Who wants to work at that place? Anybody? Yeah, say yes. I want to work at that place. Yeah. So guess what? It turns out that if you want to do those things, you cannot skip this conversation. You have to have it. About a year ago, I was in a meeting with a global company, one of the biggest in the world of their kind. And about 5 years ago, they put a stake in the ground and they declared, we are going to be the most innovative company in the world. Sound pretty audacious? So they threw all sorts of money at that. They hired geniuses. They transformed their environments into the most creative workplaces you've ever been in. And guess what? They said, you know what we've learned? We will never get there if we keep trying to get around this failure thing. If we don't actually get this figured out, we'll never get there. So this morning, as Pete was talking to you about this vision, I was envisioning him inviting all of you to put your foot on the gas and just press. Anybody feel that? Anybody want to just leave here this week and just put your foot on the gas and just go? Here's the thing about that. It's not enough to just put your foot on the gas and just go. You also have to take your foot off the brake. Because if you have your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time, what do? You just spin. So as it turns out, all of us, every one of us in this room, has had a relationship with this thing called failure from the minute you were born. Do you know that? From the time you were an infant, your very first cry was an experiment of sorts. And when things didn't work out the way you intended, you were having a failure experience. You've had millions of them. Little ones, big ones, and they all add up to your relationship with failure. And unless you take a really good look at that relationship and you get conscious and on purpose about what that is, it gets in your way. And I'm going to unpack a few of the reasons why that happens this morning. But first of all, I think this is a good starting place. What in the world is failure anyway? When we talk about it, what is it? For those of you who answered the survey, you'll notice that the first question that I asked you is, what is failure? How do you define failure? Did anyone find this question to be challenging in a surprising kind of way? This is what I hear from people, because all of us know the word, right? It's familiar to us. We get the concept. We know what failure is. Of course I know what that is. And then you sit down and you try to do the definition and you're like, how do you define that? You know why? Because it is such a complex, unique to each person kind of experience in so many ways. From a cognitive perspective, it's incredibly complex. And one of the challenges in organizations that we have is we all walk around with our own definition of what failure is, and we often fail to compare notes. And we're not even sure what we mean. So here's what you said. This is a little word cloud that I put together of your answers, and you can see, you know how these things go. The bigger words are the ones that were the most repeated. Mostly what you did when you defined failure is you told me what it is not. The thing you did the most was you said it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. It's not success, it's not getting what you want, it's not achieving, it's not meeting your goals. And so there's a way that you have a sense of what this is based on sort of what it isn't. The second thing that was really strong, of course, is goals. This idea that failure has something to do with the goals that you are achieving or not achieving, and results. You see that one is pretty big as well. Here's my attempt at it. So I'm going to admit that this is grammatically not great, but this is just my crack at it. Failure is an experience that begins with an expectation, and we're going to unpack that part more in a minute, that hasn't been met, but it ends or it results in some way with your brain getting different. So failure is actually a requirement that your brain has for actually learning and changing. It's mechanically, failure is something that we have to experience in life. We would never develop without it. So failure is something that dramatically changes our brain, even structurally. So it turns out that failure is actually a very powerful cognitive experience that we all have all the time. So here's a little sort of visual way that I've tried to map this out and unpack this a little bit. So if you start at the top, any failure experience, little, big, doesn't matter what kind it is, it's always going to start with an expectation. Your brain loves and craves certainty. So it's going to lock in on something. It's going to say, this is what is going to happen, and then you're going to start taking the action toward it. You're going to start doing stuff, moving toward it, and at some point, when the reality and the expectation, this magical moment in time where it's supposed to happen, doesn't happen, there's this flicker of recognition in your brain. Your brain picks it up, almost non-consciously. It didn't work. And in that millisecond, there is some cognitive impact, chemically. Your brain will release some chemicals based on what its experience is, and very quickly, in the same millisecond, a story starts to form. You start to tell a story about what's happening, and you do it very non-consciously most of the time, and you do it in a way that best suits what you need, what your ego needs, what emotionally, psychologically you actually need in this experience, what makes sense to you. So you quickly form this story. So let's just say that I'm walking across the stage, and all of a sudden my mic falls off. And in that second, that's a little bit of a failure, right? Sort of a micro failure. So that microphone falls down, and in a millisecond, I'm going to tell myself a story about that. It can be, oh, I'm so stupid. I don't know how to hang on to mics. Or it could be, wow, those tech guys sure didn't do a good job with this mic. Or it could be, oh, that just happened on its own. Whatever sentence pops into my head first, that's the story I've formed. And that, as we're going to talk about later today, is the beginning of the process of memory formation. It structurally actually becomes my memory of what happened. So it's really important, and as a result of that, your brain starts to change and get different. We call this altered cognition. And as your brain starts to get different because of that, that ultimately leads to either an attraction or an avoidance to certain things, to certain triggers, that ultimately become your risk intelligence. So before we unpack this a little bit more, I have a couple questions that I want you to think about. So you all have pad of paper on your table in front of you. So I'd like you to grab that paper, or you can open up your journal,